Hello? Oh, it was on mute. Okay, well that's good. I was about to disconnect everything. It's a feature, it's not a bug. Good to see you all. My name's Hikazyme and I'm starting again. Boom! Good to see you all. Yes, this is a long weekend in Japan. Tomorrow, Monday, is a day off. I believe it is Thanksgiving for hard work day, and it's been one of those weeks where I have been so busy that I was just looking actually at my Twitter feeds, and it's been about 4 days since I've actually even been buffering up stories and stuff like that. So I did that this evening and just caught a bunch of stories. So actually I have less than usual just because I've not been keeping up on Twitter, and I was planning actually this week to take a day off on Friday and have a quiet day at home, and was very much looking forward to doing a live stream with JJ Walsh on sustainability on Friday. Instead, things were just looking a bit busy at work, and it didn't seem like a good time. So I decided not to take the day off, still thinking I'd be fine 5 p.m. to join a live stream. And as it turned out, that day blew up. And by the time I actually looked down at my watch and took a moment to breathe, it was like 6:30, and then I realized, oh, I missed the whole thing. So that was terrible. It happens now and again, right? And it makes me all the more appreciative of having a day off tomorrow, especially for a Thanksgiving for work day. I hope you're all keeping well. Of course, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it is getting kind of worse in terms of the pandemic in most places, including in Japan. Record numbers this week, including in Tokyo. We broke 500 for the first time for 3 days. Today on the weekend, the numbers typically go down. It was down to 390. Which is still the highest ever on a Sunday in Japan, because they don't typically test during the weekend, or at least they don't process the results of the tests on the weekends. Osaka, however, had 490 cases today, more than Tokyo. Congrats, I suppose. They finally beat us at something. The other big story on the news tonight, other than the earthquake that happened in the middle of the news, which was just a tremor here in Tokyo, but it was actually centered on Tokaimura, where there's a nuclear power plant which had an accident many years ago. The main story was that the government has suddenly decided that maybe this whole subsidizing traveling all over the place and drinking and partying subsidy that they're giving people in Japan, while it's been good apparently for the economy, perhaps now that every prefecture is kind of going crazy with cases, and although the numbers here are much less than in other places, the capacity of hospitals, particularly in small prefectures, to cope is a lot less. They've suddenly announced yesterday or today that they're going to rethink this whole subsidizing travel everywhere, which is probably why the pandemic has been much more evenly spread this time. The first two waves in Japan were really centered around particularly Tokyo. Even Osaka kind of got off the hook on the first two. And it was actually what was a little bit aggravating was, I think we talked about how in places like Iwate Prefecture and so on, the prejudice against people coming from Tokyo, the idea that they might bring the disease, as well as when Tokyo ran out of hospital beds and they started talking about sending patients for intensive care in places like Shizuoka and so on. Local residents started blockading hospitals, and they didn't want patients from Tokyo bringing the disease down with them to those prefectures as patients in intensive care. So there was this real stigma against Tokyo, and I suppose if the GoTo travel campaign has been good for anything, it's the fact that they're paying people from Tokyo to travel all over the place and spread the disease around more, means that places like Iwate and places that had 0 cases now have lots of cases. In fact, per capita of population, Okinawa, Osaka, and Hokkaido are way ahead of Tokyo now, suffering much worse, and pretty much the whole country now. There isn't really anywhere on this third wave that isn't really feeling it in a bad way now. So I suppose if there is an upside, it's that they can't really stigmatize Tokyo anymore. In fact, Tokyo is definitely in a third wave, but its curve is much less than the rest of the country, which just goes to show, I suppose, we're sharing in the misery a little bit. That said, it is all still not incomparably better than Europe and North America. And why that is still a bit of a mystery, but no question, it's still happening and it's still spreading. So yeah. Be talking a bit about that tonight. Be talking about a few other stories that we've got, including Walmart selling up and leaving Japan and what's behind that. A couple of other stories, but really not very much. Let's go and see who is in the comments. I see people already, Erin already saying squirrel. Yes, that's what I do. I chase squirrels. Let's see who is in here. So we've got, already said hello to Marcos Fernandez as well as TechArt2. Good to see you both. We've got Mr. Cordy Chep buffering up the flux capacity. I was literally saying I was buffering up. I thought you were repeating me, but I was on mute at the time. So yeah, Mr. Cordy Chep, clearly you're watching the show a lot. Ogaton, good to see. Thank you for telling me that there was no sound. Yes, I was looking at the flux capacitor in front of me that was saying that there was no sound, so I fixed that. We've got Steve from Berkeley. Boom, indeed. We've got Jay's M, Mime Edition, mixing it up. That's what I do. I'm try to keep it interesting. Andrea Morboy, yes, indeed. Late at night there, but of course a lot better down in Australia. Hope you're well, Andrea. Thanks for joining. Who else we got in here? We got Sergeant Buko. Boom, indeed. We've got good to have you here. We've got Odie Jr. Boom. Quint Ranked. Hi, all indeed. Paragoti. Good to see you from Corona-infested Germany. I'm sorry to hear that Germany is Corona-infested. It was always a little bit mysterious to me how the media was kind of praising Germany for being like one of the best cases of handling. And granted, within Europe, they did a good job, but compared to almost anywhere in Asia, obviously it wasn't as good there. It's hard, of course, when the borders are all open and you've got places like Italy that were doing so terribly. But yeah, believe me, no one's getting off the hook this time. It's up again in Hong Kong. It's up again in South Korea. It's definitely up in Japan. Taiwan still seems to be doing pretty well, and I haven't heard anything about Vietnam. But yeah, hope you are staying safe and well, Paragotti, and good to have you here in the comments. Who else we got in here? We've got Aaron again. Hello again. Mentioning squirrels again. Yes, good to see you. The runs, toilet paper icons. I'll just approve that, although that's fine. Yeah, Bald Berlitz boy, excellent to see you. Tomorrow's a holiday. Your mum says you can stay up. Well, that's why you're here. Good to see you. Oh yeah, that just before I get into the topics as well. So yeah. Credit to Disney. I think they paid like $4 billion or something for Star Wars, and people weren't sure. It did make sense. And obviously the movies that they made, kind of left a bit to be desired as to whether it was a good investment. However, The Mandalorian, I don't know if you're watching it, but I for the second season, I did sign up to Disney Plus, and I've been enjoying watching it. I kind of watched all the episodes, and my son was just not really into Star Wars, but now that I got Star Wars Plus, Disney Plus, they should call it Star Wars Plus, I showed him The Mandalorian, and we started binge watching the season 1, and we just caught up just yesterday. And he's now sufficiently got the Star Wars bug from The Mandalorian more than the movies that now today he went and watched like 5 of the Star Wars movies, one after another, just wanting to get his fix. And he's like complaining to me tonight that he's got to wait until next week to see another episode. It is amazingly well done. I mean, that is just the best thing Star Wars related. And this is as someone who went to the theaters to watch both the Marauders of Endor and the Caravan of Courage. After Return of the Jedi, they did make 2 more Star Wars movies around the Ewoks, and they were terrible. They were so bad. I mean, the prequels were great compared to those. The Christmas special, I watched all of them. I thought Rogue One was awesomely done, but The Mandalorian is actually astoundingly well done. Between that and watching The Crown this week, I did get into that at one point. I watched that whole thing as someone from the Commonwealth. You don't have to be from the Commonwealth to appreciate it. It does. 1, it's really good. I mean, it's just really compelling. 2, it was really good this season because it's stuff all within my lifetime, so I could remember all of those events. 3, it makes you feel sympathetic a little bit for the, of course, it's fiction. Of course, some of those conversations are probably definitely never happened, or people wouldn't have talked like that, and they were just trying to be a little bit too explicit, maybe for American audiences or whatever. 4, I didn't realize until after I finished watching The Crown that Gillian Anderson was playing Margaret Thatcher. I thought they just got some lookalike, who I thought just did a very good job. And then when I went to read Rotten Tomatoes after I watched it, and it said that Gillian Anderson like became Margaret Thatcher, I was like, was Gillian Anderson in this? I was like, holy crap, Agent Scully. Like, wow, that was amazing. And five, having watched The Crown, I'm definitely still a Republican. Not a Republican in the American sense. Americans just change words like so stupidly. Republican, liberal. Liberal means a free trade advocate, generally right-wing or conservative. You can be socially liberal and economically liberal, i.e. you don't think that government should be, it's like anti-socialist. But socially liberal as well, like open, but it doesn't mean left-wing in most countries, and most liberal parties around the world are not left-wing. Talked about this before. Same with Republican. Republican in most countries means, particularly in Commonwealth countries where we have the Queen, the Crown, as our head of state. Lovely people, but they're not, from our country, and Republican means without a monarchy. It means being a country that has its own head of state, like a president or a governor or, prime minister or whatever. And yeah, in New Zealand, it's not so much that everyone loves the monarchy so much as we all just think that if things aren't broken, you don't need to fix them. Australians are more openly Republican, although they're just fighting over the model for it. I guess that's the half Australian side of me that thinks it's ridiculous for either country to have the Queen of England as the head of state. That was kind of reinforced as well. It is ultimately silly. Although at the same time, I do point out to my constitutional scholar friends, who I actually have a few of, that writing down a constitution is where it all goes wrong. It's much better to have some repressed Germans, some slightly inbred, emotionally repressed Germans who realize that when other royal families tried to actually exercise power, they all got executed or fired or, deposed. So they're all kind of restrained and tortured and unable to do anything. Better to have that as like a living constitution than a written constitution where you can have like Bill Clinton talking about the definition of "the" with regards to, blue dresses and whatnot, and guns and insanity. I mean, So I don't know. Australia, they tried writing down a constitution, which includes New Zealand in Australia's territory, and led to somebody reading what it said and firing the government without authority in the 1970s. So it seems to me whenever you write down constitution, it is actually in a way having there are upsides to it. But yes. Anyway, that is very much a sidetrack because I don't have many topics tonight. But if I would recommend anybody. Definitely, it's not the sort of thing I would think that I would be into myself. I'm a science fiction guy, but The Crown is really good. It's just really good writing, and I can't wait for Better Call Saul to come back. Anyway, that's what I've been watching. Looks like some more people have been in here. We've got Listeo. Excellent to see you, Listeo. Welcome again. Marcos Fernandez. My mic is most likely not properly connected. It keeps turning on and off. No way. Hang on a sec. It does seem to be connected. I'm sorry if it keeps dropping out. Tell me if that keeps happening. Yes, Andrea, thank you for the butter thing. Tokyo 503, the GoTo campaign has been extended to GoTo Hospital, indeed. Hamid Mahdi, you're in Korea. It's bad there in Korea, but since the government, they're definitely full on with the tracing and whatnot. So there we go. Quint Rankin, have I watched Lone Wolf and Cub? I have not. I don't even know what that is. So if that's on, is that on Netflix or Disney or whatever? I'll look it up. Thank you for the suggestion. Might sign up to D+, but Walt Disney is ruining so many franchises with anime style films. Oh yeah, I kind of get that. Good night, Andrea Moboy. Have a good night. You might have missed this already, but there we go. Papa Power, good to see you. Good evening, South Carolina. Good to have South Carolina here. Well, you guys have been in the news a lot lately, but definitely good to have you on board. The Crown is good indeed. Kang and Kodos, good to see you, but good to have you here. The Crown is good, but how accurate is it? The history is good. I don't know, now that it's closer, it feels a little bit less plausible or a little bit too dramatic and explicit this time, but it still seemed pretty good. Who knows? The Diana Charles stuff, who knows? But they've done a good job of creating a really compelling drama that matches to the history. But obviously they're making all of the stuff up in terms of, but it fits the narrative and the outcomes that we know about pretty well. So that's pretty cool. What else we got? I think it just jumped ahead there. I think I've got everybody else here to say hello to. Liberals, classic liberals, yes indeed, Clint Rankid. Although perhaps inaccurate, Jefferson gets that label. I'm not sure I'd consider a slave owner liberal, although I guess he would. I get your point, actually, and in terms of being kind of he open to trade and whatnot, maybe Jefferson was, but yes. Mr. Quarterchip, Mike is fine. Thank you for correcting that. And still going off and on. Okay, well, I'm hearing some people saying that the mic is fine. And Marcos, I'm sorry it's not working for you. Yeah, perhaps it's your sound and not mine. By the way, Christopher Luke, excellent to see you. Let's dive into the topics. So what have we got here? The 10 most desirable sort of news, rocket news. They've always got stories like this, but let's check it out. The latest ones, the latest 10 most desirable prefectures in which to live. According to latest polls, last year Tokyo was number 1, Hokkaido. But earlier this year, Fukui did better. But let's see how we go with that. Let's just skip ahead to the ranking here. So top ranked prefecture, Kanagawa, which is honestly a suburb. I mean, that's Yokohama, basically. And that is a suburb of Tokyo. And that's not exactly small city living at all. It is lovely. And it is actually, when people talk about the best place in or around Tokyo to live in, yes, everybody talks about how Yokohama people generally brag the most. Saitama thinks they're the best. Hachioji thinks that they're the best. Kashiwa thinks that they're the best. Omiya thinks that they're the best. Chiba City thinks that they're the best. But yeah, when Yokohama says it, everyone else kind of goes, yeah, you're probably right about that. So not really a surprise that Tokyo and Kanagawa get the top 2 places. Hokkaido just is a great lifestyle. It's actually in summer. It really looks and feels and has a real New Zealand vibe about it. It's got about the same population as New Zealand. It's spread out. It's all pastures. It's where they make all the butter and the milk and whatnot in the country. Definitely get Hokkaido in every time except for winter. I mean, winter, it is just amazingly cold up there. But yeah. Kyoto, nice to visit, wouldn't want to live there. Okinawa, yeah, sure, why not? Fukuoka always rates pretty high as being a great city. It's like not too big. It's like 1.5 million people. It's big enough, it's got everything, but not so big that it's overwhelming. So yeah, it's a good city. Osaka, a little bit down the list. Hyogo, Kobe. Kobe is like the Yokohama by reputation anyway. I've never been there. But by reputation, Kobe is like the Yokohama of Osaka. If that makes sense. It's like a port city. It's surrounded by hills. It's quite scenic and so on. But yeah, Chiba Prefecture. Probably not Chiba City. It is convenient to Tokyo, and that's nice. You've got great beaches and so on there. Particularly, you've got great surfing beaches and so on in Onjuku, but they're not very nice beaches. But if you go down the very bottom of the Boso Peninsula, which is basically what Chiba is, down the very bottom in Tateyama, they've got some beautiful beaches down there. And speak of beautiful beaches, Shizuoka. Shizuoka is like 3 hours from Tokyo, and again down the very bottom of that peninsula, like with Chiba as well, they've got the best beaches, some of the best beaches I've seen anywhere in the world. They've got scuba diving, they've got surfing, they've got hot springs, they've got Mount Fuji. Yeah, Shizuoka, I get it. So yeah, the ranking makes sense. I don't know if any of you disagree or think that there's a prefecture there that should be in the top 10, but JZM, this is how the trouble starts. Yes, that probably is it. Kran, good to see you, and very foreigner friendly. And indeed, you can catch ferries to Busan from Fukuoka. It is very Asian foreigner friendly, and it's just a friendly part of Japan. Is there anywhere in Japan that has a more even climate throughout the year? Tokyo is like hell in summer. Interesting question there, Christopher Luke. Okinawa does, simply because it's more tropical. It's closer to it's not in the tropics, but it's close to the tropics, and it's surrounded by ocean. So the temperature variation, of course, it gets hot there, but it doesn't get as hot as the mainland because, again, it's moderated by the ocean, and it doesn't get as cold. So if you're looking purely for least variation in climate, probably Okinawa. the reason that they moved the capital from Kansai, from Kyoto to Tokyo, was that Tokyo has a more moderate. Its summers are not as miserable as the summers in Kyoto and Osaka, and the winters are not as cold. It is still cold. It still is, for me, it's much more dramatic than what I grew up being used to. It is funny as well that you would think that because Tokyo is further north, it would be colder in winter than Kyushu, for example, which is further south, which is typically warmer. But because Kyushu is so exposed to all the winter weather, they get colder down there than Tokyo does. So their winters down there are not as good, and they get hotter than Tokyo. So within the main four islands, actually, Tokyo was selected for its climate, which isn't, it's still miserable, but it's as good as it gets. And if you want moderation, well, not moderation, but consistency, yeah, you probably want to get down to the Ogasawara Islands, and the Amami Oshima Island, or really Okinawa, probably for that. Believe in yourself. Good to see you. Once you took the Beetle 2 turbo-powered hydrofoil to Busan, I wanted to catch that. I actually bought tickets for it. And then it was cancelled because a typhoon was coming at the time I was planning to go to Korea. So instead of that, I got an air ticket, flew ahead of the storm, and went over there by airplane. So I missed out on going by ferry. But yes, you can do that. It takes about 5 hours, doesn't it? Redman in Japan, what up? Good to see you. And Tawaiwai, excellent. The best place for temperate climate is Chichijima in Tokyo, or Tokyo Prefecture. But like I said, it's like the Ogasawara Islands that I just mentioned. It's very far south, and like Okinawa, very moderate. So that's a Tawaiwai. Yeah, for climate, you want to go on one of those little isolated islands, but probably in the main four islands, actually. Surprisingly, Tokyo is pretty good. Travel campaign under review. So that guy who's basically, every time that they pointed out that the numbers are spiking all over the country, two interesting numbers came up this week. One, the pandemic's the worst it's ever been, and it's the most widespread within Japan than it's ever been. So not, like I was saying before, not as really concentrated in Tokyo as it was before. Which may or may not, but it's hard to see how it's not at least partly to do with the government promoting people traveling all over the place and spreading the disease all over the country. That's contributed to prefectures that haven't really experienced it until now getting hit really hard by this. Yet in spite of this, the Minister of Infrastructure, Land and Trade, or the Transport and, whatever it is, he's in charge of the tourism agency, kept saying when being asked, is this really a good idea to continue paying people to travel all over the place with the pandemic spreading everywhere? And he kept responding, this is no time to be thinking about stopping the economic subsidy for tourism campaign, when clearly it kind of was. And the minister in charge of the pandemic and also for economic revitalization was kind of responding the same way. They finally cracked today. The Prime Minister gave a speech sort of saying that, this is now a matter of life and safety, and the government's going to do a review. So they're going to put the GoTo campaign on hold and figure out if they are going to change the criteria. For example, to withdraw subsidies for prefectures that are overwhelmed, whose health systems are now on the brink of collapse. Already, in spite of the low numbers, they just don't have the capacity for a lot of intensive care patients. And there are a lot of prefectures, including Okinawa, Tokyo, Osaka, Hokkaido, I believe Miyagi as well, are already at this, even with lower numbers. So the government's finally hearing from all of these regional prefectures that were asking the government to send money and tourists and keep the economy going, and the government did it. Now they're kind of being told again by the they never listen to Tokyo on this sort of thing, but when they're being told, hey, all these sick people, spreading the pandemic around. So they are looking now at cancelling it. However, they said today that they are going to put it on pause, but right before a long weekend, the Thanksgiving for hard work long weekend. So it's an extra day off tomorrow. And we have the end of year, and people are already buying their tickets for end of year trips and, going home basically for New Year's and so on. So right now the media is going crazy. The travel industry is going crazy, saying, well, are they going to have to, a trip's going to be cancelled because of this? Because the other thing that's really happening, I think it's happening possibly everywhere else as well, is that people have gotten a little blasé about the pandemic. Certainly the panic from the beginning is gone. There's news stories about how the size of crowds and the busyness in places like Shibuya has returned pretty much almost to normal. People are commuting to work and not working remotely so much anymore. So this contributed to Japan having the highest GDP growth in 40 years this last quarter, which is really just not really from real economic growth. It's more bouncing back from like a crushing drop, recession or negative growth that had happened in the 2 quarters previously because of the pandemic. But clearly the subsidies for going to restaurants and going to, and the travel campaign have also benefited the state of the economy. And Japan was making the news just at the start of the week as, possibly showing that they've not eradicated the disease, but they've had the disease quite at a low level. And at the same time, they've managed to avoid as much economic damage as other places. But that said, now it's getting worse. The government is sort of looking to change their plans, but of course it's not clear what the criteria is going to be, if they're even going to do it. People have already made travel plans for this weekend and are making plans for the end of the year. Who's going to handle the cancellation fees if they lose the subsidies? Is the government going to subsidize the travel agencies that are going to lose all the money from this, who this was supposed to be for? So it is a royal mess. But yeah, that is what it is. It is still common sense. I mean, it's actually weird that they did not do this in the first place. Tawaiwai, sorry to hear that. But this sort of thing is getting more common. The other thing, by the way, that's happening with the numbers is where before it was like more than 50% of people were like young people getting it, like basically below 40. Now it's gone down a lot. Like now it's mainly people 40 and above that are getting it, which again shows people going back to work and being less cautious. The other thing, of course, is that is getting into Bonenkai season, end of year drinking party season, and with that as well, those are being further promoted by the government handing out coupons and subsidies for people to go out to restaurants and have parties. And most of the clusters that are now happening all over the place are drinking party related, because you can't really cover your mouth when you're drinking and eating and talking at the same time, which is what's great about Bonenkai. Some government minister was on the news showing you should wear a full face like plastic mask while you're at a Bonenkai, and other people are giving advice to eat when you're eating, be silent, and then put your mask on when you're finished and then talk. But again, this is not what Bonenkai are. So yeah, any idea that this relative success that the Japanese government's had with the results of the pandemic, I can tell you it's pure luck. It's in spite of the government more than anything else. But that is the thing that is happening. Anyway, let me bring the comments back down. Remember, as always, by the way, if you want to get my attention, at Mark Kikozaimon, it will flash orange as you will be able to see. And when I look across, I will answer any questions. But moving on in the topics. 7 & I, the 7-Eleven chain. People get confused by this, by the way, as well. 7-Eleven, so is that an American company that's done well in Japan? Actually, it's kind of, originally, yes, it was. It was 7-Eleven, an American company, and they set up a franchise in Japan, and the franchisee company in Japan. 7-Eleven did really well in Japan, and it did really, in time, the business collapsed in the US. It didn't do very well. And so the Japanese franchisee, which is 7 & I Holdings, did well enough that first of all they bought from 7-Eleven all of the franchises in Asia, and then when the US business looked like that we're going to get out of business, the Japanese franchise of 7-Eleven bought out the US company. So 7-Eleven is a Japanese company now, although it was established as a US company, but they got bought out by their franchise holder in Japan. They've set a lot of companies are now doing this, but they've set out a plan for being zero emissions by 2050. And interesting how they're going about it, apart from trying to purchase renewable energy, which is hard to do because there isn't very much of it being generated in Japan. You can also do other tricks, like you can pay for planting forests or saving forests that would be chopped down overseas, and you can count those as carbon credits and whatnot. But yeah, they're also doing things like promoting energy efficiency. For example, they're installing solar panels on top of their convenience stores using energy efficient LED lamps. And they are planning with Toyota to replace their fleet of trucks with fuel cell trucks, not battery trucks. Again, like in the US, Toyota in Japan's been for a long time emphatic on, or at least has been running with fuel cell technology, which, as we've talked about before, it's basically like instead of gasoline, you can pour hydrogen into the cars rather than combusting hydrogen, which you can also do, by the way. And combusting hydrogen just results in water coming out, so it's actually not a bad technology. But no, you can also use them to run electric batteries. So it's basically like an electric motor like you get in a Tesla, but instead of the energy coming from a stored battery, it actually comes from a liquid hydrogen fuel. So yeah, this is the technology Japan is mainly invested in. It'll be interesting to see if more electric cars come out, but yeah, lots of companies moving in this direction. It's good to see the flurry of activity around this lately. I mean, it's unfortunately happening at a time that, as we've talked about here, it appears that we have tipped over into the runaway greenhouse effect now. Like basically, even if we stopped emitting carbon now, things like the tundra in Siberia and Canada is now like defrosting, and all of the organic material that hasn't decomposed, that's built up without decomposing because it was frozen for like thousands of years, is now decomposing. And so you're getting like thousands of years of decomposition-based methane getting released at the same time, and it's resulting in these crazy like craters all over the place, basically wherever there's permafrost melting, and that's releasing methane, which is actually worse than I think it's 6 times more greenhouse enhancing than carbon. So now we have a problem that we've hit, kind of broken the thresholds that we were deciding in the 1990s we were going to try to avoid through cutting emissions, and we didn't do that, and now it's running away. So it's great now that everybody's sort of aiming at trying to get things to neutral, but in terms of preventing things getting hotter, that's actually not going to do it. It's only going to slow down the runaway effect that's happening, and this is where there's interesting debate as well that I like reading. I don't understand very well about the sort of the geoengineering possibilities to sequester and try to correct through conscious intervention the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. But again, the scale that's required for that, and of course the sort of potential side effects aren't very clear. But it is good to see, better late than never, that companies like this in Japan that seem now to be finally getting serious about this. It's just a shame it's taken so long. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. This is the Prime Minister announcing that they were going to put a hold on the GoTo travel campaign and the internet reactions. Everyone talking about like you're at least a month too late. The cancellations are going to be crazy and put people out of business. Yes, see, you were trying to hold on and you couldn't. That decision is way too late. Some insults against bald people, referring to the Prime Minister. I think that's quite uncalled for. Saying that announcing it without any details right before a long weekend when everybody's going to be traveling. Other people saying, you idiot, announce it before the long weekend when everyone goes traveling. Basically, everybody's just pouring scorn on the Prime Minister for just being indecisive and too late, as you would expect. Ms. Cordice, why sequester from the atmosphere when concentration of CO2 in seawater is significantly higher? Well, who knows? Probably both. I believe it's atmospheric CO2, and not just CO2. It's other gases as well that are mainly attributed for the warming effect. I don't know if carbon and seawater contribute similarly. Perhaps it does. I don't know. But we talk about atmospheric emissions as being behind the global warming and climate change. But who knows? Christopher Luke, it was a Financial Times article and not done by climate scientists, so hopefully it's not as bad as they make it out to be. Still a bummer though. Well, just the numbers are crazy. Just this week, again, you can't really link a single weather event. For example, the hottest November day ever was in the 1960s, when this clearly wasn't statistically a problem. However, the average temperatures each month have been going up, steadily. But we've just had this week, end of November in Tokyo, beautiful full-on summer days, like highs of above 25 degrees, and it's wonderful. As a person who lives in Tokyo and went out for a jog and enjoyed the sunshine and wearing t-shirt and shorts, it's lovely. But in the bigger scheme of things, if this sort of thing is happening more often now, when it was supposed to happen like once a century, like the last time it got this hot was like 50 years ago, and that was like for one day, and it was cold like the rest of the time, yeah, it's not a good thing. I also hope it's not as bad. Oh, so you're talking about the projections that it's already run away. Yeah, I hope that they're inaccurate as well, but it seems so far that at least like when people were looking at this really hard, like from the 90s when the IPCC was put together, and we're already outrunning what were considered the most pessimistic projections from back then. I mean, sea levels have already risen like 20 centimeters, and temperatures have gone up at a faster rate. So yeah, it's really important that we take this thing seriously, and we've kind of, I think, not, or we've kind of hoped a little bit for the best and hoped that people are being over pessimistic for about 25 years now, and we're paying the price. That is what it is. I mean, this is interesting. This is just a story in Nikkei looking at this whole thing, and how Japan hasn't really met. Oh, damn it. I looked at this earlier and it was logged in. Can I do this without violating privacy? Give me a sec. Let me see if I can stop mirroring for a moment. Yeah. That's not ideal either, is it? Let me see if I can log in and show you this. Will it let me? Okay. That program is now freaking out. Okay. Technical issue. It happens. So now that I've disconnected it, I have lost the whole thing. Hang on a sec. I can fix it. Boom. Exit. Restart. Yes. Boom, 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 boom. Boom. Okay. It's back, but not quite in the right place. What's happening there? Ah. Full screen. Boom. Fixed. Okay, so Temiko, is the Nikkei subscription worth it? I like the articles there. Yeah, I for me it is. It gives Japan news in a lot of detail with good writers, and you get access to a lot of stuff which I can also use at work. So for me, yes, I do like it. The password is password. Tech art too. Hey Perk, good to see you, Perk. Good to have you here. Sorry for that delay there. But yes, indeed. It is pretty good. But look, what's interesting about this was the graphs. I love the graphs. So yes, Japan is being kind of critical because you can see here the carbon emissions per unit of GDP. And the criticism of Japan is the yellow line, which started out like second from the bottom and has kind of been the same. It's gone down from about 4 to about 3 over since 1990. The US has come down a long way, you can see, by the way, and Switzerland is doing something right, obviously. Maybe they'd never used electricity in the first place. The thing about the Japan graph that really stands out to me is that it was kind of coming down until 2011, and you can see it going up again, and that's clearly the Fukushima accident and the ending use of nuclear power plants. And I'm kind of optimistic it would have gotten down a lot more if that had not happened, because there were plans to increase use of nuclear and other sources that got kind of, shafted by that. So you can sort of see Japan's always been relatively energy efficient and relatively good. It's really more from being energy efficient than it is from using renewable sources. But what's really happened is that Europe has gone so crazy with using renewable sources and carbon neutral sources of energy that, yeah, they've reduced a lot, and Japan has not, and it's being sort of criticized for that. Carbon emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity. Japan has now gone up, whereas most of these other countries, particularly in the last 10 years, have gone down. So, it's something where the Nikkei is pointing out it's actually causing companies that, like investment funds are looking at Japanese companies and they're looking for these sort of improvement metrics, and given that Japan's not doing it, it's affecting investment. That said, when there's this CDP, basically a British NGO that assesses companies that have sort of excellent environmental records, it turns out that Japan has the highest number, 38 companies that get the highest rating of A, including Eon and Panasonic and a few others, more than the US, which has much more companies, obviously a bigger economy, and these other countries on the list. So Japan does have a high number of companies, a bit like we saw just now with 7-Eleven, that are doing quite well at this. But overall, it's true that Japan has in a difficult position to improve because it was already kind of doing well in the beginning, but it's kind of got things which are not improving as much. So yeah, just interesting. I found this just a really interesting read. Oh, don't log me up, bro. But that was a thing. Anyway, that I thought was just super interesting. This is interesting as well. Nippon.com just doing a summary on the state of same-sex unions in Japan. Not recognized at a national level. Only one, or I think two prefectures have actually recognized on a prefecture level, which are Ibaraki and Osaka, I believe, if you see a map. And the other prefectures have municipalities, i.e. local government entities such as cities or wards or whatever, that have introduced them. And that's the case in Tokyo, that there are local governments in Tokyo, like such as I believe Setagaya was the first, and Shibuya I think has done this as well, where you can now also get married or register as a married couple if you're same sex, and that is a good thing. At the same time, given that it's so widespread, there is still the question: why not do it more at the national or the prefectural level? Reminds me a little bit of what seems to be happening with drug legalization in America. That, the idea being, I think this is what happened with alcohol as well, possibly. That yes, when prohibition sort of ended in phases, eventually it got to a point where it made sense for the whole country to sort of just change over. People didn't feel strongly against it anymore. And clearly, that's what's happening in Japan. This is why not? I mean, why would you care? Why would you be opposed to it happening? It only really seems to have lobbies against it happening due to religion, where it happens, and that's not really a factor in Japan. Buddhists just don't give a crap. Gotta love the Buddhists. I mean, and I've never heard Christian. I don't think I've ever said. Well, Japan does have some. No question, actually, Japan has hardline Christian groups, but when they have them, they're like Unification. Well, they're not really Christian. They call themselves a Unification Church or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever. But they're not really politically influential. So it's a good thing about Japan. And I hope in the near future that this whole thing is just having friends in Japan who have done these and have been married before this was available in the British Embassy, because that was one way to do it. And now that it's becoming more widespread, it's a good thing. It's nice to see Japan being open to this sort of thing. Tech art too. International same-sex marriage is recognized. More or less. I believe, well, the problem is that if you are same-sex married in UK, for example, and again, I know people in Japan who have married in the British Embassy for this purpose. The question is whether the City Council office will give you spousal benefits or recognize on the local City Council register that you could be a same-sex spouse. Again, this is why I think the national government should just recognize it. So I think there's a question. I think now across that map that I just showed you, they would recognize a foreign marriage, but whether it would happen in the areas that don't have provision for that is a little bit awkward. I suspect part of the reason it's more international places that have probably been done this first, precisely because of this issue. But and this is something as well that not just Japan, obviously other places as well should do as well, exactly for that reason. But Walmart, they sold up 85%. So back in, when was it? Hopefully my login sticks now. Damn it. This is, never mind. Interesting story here. So from memory, Walmart bought out Seiyu, which was basically a kind of failing, struggling supermarket. But as a supermarket, Seiyu is kind of like when I used to live out in Hachioji. They were sort of always in the station building. and were associated, so you'd go there. They weren't quite a department store, but they were a bit more than a regular supermarket. They have their own special brand stuff, but they were kind of like a shopping mall, kind of quasi, like a kind of extended supermarket, not quite a department store. But you could buy clothes there, you could buy fancy, fruit and stuff there, as well as cheap stuff. And but they were sort of just struggling in this sort of post bubble age in Japan. And around 2000, Walmart bought them out. It might have been a little bit after that, with the idea being that they wanted to expand their operations into Asia and to other developed countries, and they thought that this was a good opportunity where they could come into an inefficient, large Japanese company, and they could make their operations. They can improve their operations with American-style management and create a success story, turn Seiyu around and build on that to launch into other countries. What happened is happens a lot. I mean, sometimes it works. Sometimes companies come in and they do that. Hey, King of Kanto, what up? Good to have you in here. Aaron asked, how many Walmarts did they even have in Japan? I've never seen a Walmart in Japan. In fact, I was kind of just like, whenever I go to America, I make a beeline for a Walmart right away. Not because I really like them, to tell you the truth, but stuff is cheap. If I want to find things that are in America that I can't get in Japan, it's a good place to go looking. So I was kind of like just out of that kind of there being a Costco or there being a Carrefour kind of a thing. I wanted to see a Walmart. When I heard that they're buying out Seiyu, I was kind of interested in that, but they never really. I don't know if they may have Walmarts on US bases perhaps, but outside of that, I don't think they ever actually opened a Walmart branded store. What they did try to do is they tried to turn around Seiyu and kind of make it into a Japanese, still Seiyu, still a Japanese supermarket, but run with Walmart behind it, like Walmart, like as a model of a localizer, which actually isn't a bad idea of how to do it. Shubis, good to see you, and the Atomic Tom, also good to see you. So Walmart isn't really in Japan. They bought out a local supermarket and they ran it under the local brand, but they were behind the running of it. And their idea was these supermarkets were basically, they thought that they could make them more competitive by dropping prices, by employing less people. They employed too many people, so they fired a lot of people. They cut down sort of operations. They made people do less staff, do more for less pay. They cut costs on suppliers. They saved money all over the place to make them more efficient. And they thought that this basically, by being able to be to win on price, they looked at basically outprice all the competitors. However, the competing supermarket chains that were already more efficient than them made promises that they would match any prices that Seiyu set. So Seiyu kind of killed itself trying to drop prices. However, they actually, in the end of the day, weren't able to actually lower their prices more than their competitors and get an advantage that way. Yet at the same time, through the reduction in staff and so on, and the way that they rearrange shifts and so on, apparently it was really common, for example, for staff to just leave, like stock boxes unpacked in aisles at night when they went home, saying that the morning people could do it. There would be like the shops were just not looked after as well. They would allow like the signs on the shops, so like when the lights were broken or in the shop when the lights burned out, they wouldn't replace them. So they got messier. They also, because they had less staff, they couldn't restock the shelves when they were empty. So you'd go in and they'd be kind of dark and there'd be boxes everywhere and the shelves wouldn't be restocked sometimes, and they weren't cheaper than other places. So people sort of looked at it and they sort of looked at this kind of lean, mean approach, American capitalist approach to turning around a Japanese supermarket just resulted in a crappier supermarket, frankly. And on top of that, within the company, the focus, this is another thing actually, which I often think about and recall from my landing in Japan. The focus of management switched from being very focused on, and this is something which apparently a former Seiyu CEO criticized, after leaving. He said that the company became more focused on looking after the managers and the execs, who were focused on big numbers like profitability, efficiency and so on. And it became less concerned about the welfare of the employees that were left at the bottom of the chain carrying more. And there was an internal criticism that this is what was causing the supermarket to fail, was the lack of looking after the employees and the management just being concerned for itself. And this is kind of another thing that when in other industries, like in IT and other businesses, when I used to be an IT consultant, that one big difference between when you implement an SAP system in a company in the US, you can implement it really fast, mainly because the people making the decisions to implement the SAP system are hired as managers. They're usually someone will go and get an MBA, and then they'll go and get hired in a company as a manager. And if they fail at that, they'll quit and get a bonus, and then they'll go and get hired somewhere else as a manager. And a lot of managers of companies in the US are hired with like economics and MBA degrees, but they come up through the company and have a deep understanding of the operations. They just sort of are there to look at the high level and basically, carrying out their mission of producing numbers for shareholders that look good to increase stock value. However, in Japan, very different. In Japan, if you work for a lot of Japanese companies, it still is the system quite often that even if they're grooming you to be like the CEO of the company, you'll be in blue overalls on the work lines, not for life like some people are, but they'll rotate you through every department of the company. You'll have to live in the dorms. You'll have to be on every production line and every department. You'll work in the legal department. You'll work in the accounting department. You'll work on the production line. And it means that when you talk with managers of Japanese companies, they understand everything about their companies, which you have to respect. I mean, it can drive you crazy, but the result is SAP systems take 3 to 6 months to implement in US companies because the decisions around them are being made by people who don't really care about what's happening on the ground level, and they just can make decisions and worry about the criticism and fix it later. In Japanese companies, you can't. It takes 3 years to implement SAP systems, pretty much because you're dealing with people who understand every minute detail, and to get buy-in and to get all the pushback and all the bugs and so on, they get them all when it's on paper because they understand their company so well. So this is a problem when you implement this sort of US-style approach where you had management that was really remote from the operation of the shops. It turned off. Hey, good to see FYI Tokyo and Tai Nakamura. Good to see you guys. When you had the style that kind of was disconnected from the workers, which resulted directly in the Seiyu supermarkets kind of turning into crap. It's an interesting case study in how it failed. It did not sell up completely, by the way. It sold 85. It still is holding on to 15% of its stake, but it sold its 85% to a investment fund called KKR, which is expected to want to drive up the stock price and sell it, and Rakuten, which I guess is online shopping site, is looking to set up a logistics network that it can set up delivery sites and do the sorts of things that I guess Amazon has been doing in the US. So still, interesting, particularly the selling to Rakuten part. And apparently the company said, they see their main competitors as the online stores, and that's why they thought it was good to tie up with Rakuten. But at the same time, it's also a good lesson in what does and doesn't, what you can and can't bring into Japan. And it was interesting that the things that you would have expected, Walmart, just famously good at logistics and retail, low margin business, they couldn't do it in Japan. So really interesting story with that, well worth reading up on, and that sort of didn't work out. Another thing that's been going on is Pompeo has been on, the Secretary of State of the U.S., former CIA head, and Trump cabinet member, has been going around the Asia Pacific, representing the U.S. On one day, calling into question the integrity of the election results in Myanmar. The next day, when was asked about smooth transition of power in the U.S. government, he said he was looking forward to a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. I think, in fairness to him, not that anyone needs to be fair to him, he seems like kind of a dick, but at the same time, obviously he was trying to be kind of tripped into giving a concession that, we will, do a transition, when clearly the mode was that no one in government was supposed to admit that. I think it was kind of a little bit of a joke, but, but reinforcing that, no, you're not going to get me to say that. I laughed when I heard it. But of course people are freaked out, and I must admit the situation in the US continues to completely freak me out. But he was in Japan, upholding the image of US democracy, to again negotiate for Japan, which already covers something like 90% of US base costs in Japan, to get even more. I've given my opinions on that before. Basically, trying to stick Japan up for protection money, and they did this successfully in Korea. And Japan's kind of been playing for time, and they said, okay, we're just going to agree for 1 year, but we will do a deal. But they didn't do a deal, and now Japan's basically realized, yeah, they've kind of got over the line now. Now it's pretty clear the administration is going to change, and this is ridiculous. It will be interesting to see what happens if the new administration tries anything different with that. The other thing also that's very interesting with what's happening right now is, of course, the RCEP agreement, the sort of China-based version of the TPP. Remember, the TPP was set up by the US. However, at the last election, the Democrats disowned it, and Trump, trashed it. And I think it was actually popularly, again, the fact that even Hillary Clinton turned against it showed that they didn't have confidence that the American people actually accepted it, which is a huge problem in the first place. But now China's actually gone really aggressive now that they want to go in and be at the center of these free trade treaties, which are great for all the countries in them, but it also means that they get to write the rules. And that's a role that typically America's been at the center of in international trade. So we'll see if that's going to change and if America's going to get involved again. I think it's in America's interest and good for the world for America to be involved. But, if they don't want to be, we'll see. But interesting times anyway. It looks like Japan's not going to have to do that. I just mentioned before how Japan had the highest GDP growth in 40 years. That seems to be partly from all the GoTo travel and and it's more to do with the bounce back than it is to actual growth, but that's been interesting. And indeed, as I said, crowds back to pre-pandemic levels outside of Tokyo, which is, again, part of why the pandemic has spread everywhere outside of Tokyo and inside Tokyo this time, which is interesting. And I think this is the final one. Another international ranking of cities. Tokyo has beaten out London, Singapore, and New York now as the best city in the world to live, and dang straight. Another survey, and I think it's partly reflects the fact that Tokyo's done so much better than those other big cities like New York and London with things like that pandemic. It's kind of helped Tokyo up. But quality of living, quality of health, cost of living and whatnot, Tokyo still is a damn good place to live, and that's why I call the show Tokyo Tonight. Those are all the topics. We are exactly on time. I'm going to wrap it up. I see 2 comments. One from Barry Bonds. Good to see you, Barry Bonds. So I plan on starting another Ohio 2.0 business. I don't understand what you mean by another Ohio 2.0 business. Could you elaborate? I'd love to get another Fukugyo. I'd love to push properly with MyChan TV again, but I've been too busy lately, but I would like to do that. Take Art 2. Has Australia been involved in the contested islands for Japan? No, although Japan recently did sort of joint naval exercises with Australia, and Australia is a strong ally of the US, and the US recently recommitted to the Senkaku. In fact, Biden explicitly said that they considered the Senkaku Islands part of the US security treaty, which is interesting because the US has always kind of been hands off, although the Senkaku Islands were given to Japan by the US with the handing back of Okinawa. So, although some people have said it was a mistake by the Americans and they should have been given to Taiwan or to mainland China, that said, they were occupied prior to World War II by Japan and for a long period of time. So it's at least it'd be kind of crappy if America was responsible for giving it to Japan and then wouldn't back it up by defending that part of it. But they've been hands off. But yeah, they've put it in there, so that is good. Nesta125, good to see you. I had a lot of fun playing Among Us last night, so thank you for the invite to that. Check out Nesta's channel. I haven't seen it yet, but I think you live streamed that, right, bro? And easy to kill. I think that's going to be like my catchphrase when I play that game, because that's what happens to me when I play. Aaron, you have a good week too. Everybody have a good week. Quint Rankid, is it okay if we recommend a video from another J vlogger? Of course it is. Quint Rankid, recommend away, and nobody has to ask that. Please recommend videos before the show wraps up. Do it now. And while you do that, I'm just going to say, again, follow me on Twitter. I'll be a bit more active next week. It's been a quiet week this week, but if you're in Japan, enjoy the long weekend. Stay safe. It's getting worse. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Don't go out if you don't need to, pretty much anywhere, unless you're in the southern hemisphere where it seems to be getting better right now. Yeah, have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. Keep cool till after school. Quentin Rankid, get that recommendation in there, because I'm about to turn it off. So boom. Peace. Good night. I realize there's about a 20-second buffer between me talking and it going through on the stream, and that could be it. Tawaiwai, good night. Nesta125, good night. Couldn't rank it. Are you going to do it? You're going to do it. We're waiting for you. I'm going to count down. You can still, the comments still run for a wee while after I stop the thread, so definitely drop that in there. Paolo from Tokyo did a video on a day in the life of a politician. Might be of interest. Thank you for the recommendation. I've seen this channel a couple of times, so I'll check that out. Travis Moore, good to see you. Joined right at the end. Well, I'm glad you got in there. I'm glad I was holding on for the Paolo from Tokyo day in the life of a politician recommendation from Quinn Ranked, so everybody should check that. Remember, if you did indeed, like Shuba says, if you like the video, like it helps the channel. Good to see you all, and boom. Have a good week, everybody. Peace. End stream. Yes, I'm sure I want to end the stream. Good night.